The sky over Connecticut had begun to snow on the night before Thanksgiving. Zoe Lynn stood at the corner of the most expensive street in Westport, two enormous shopping bags dangling from her fingers, staring at the brightly lit mansion before her. This was her mother-in-law Eleanor Vanderbilt's home. No, correction, this was one of the Vanderbilt family's ancestral estates, a Georgian-style white edifice where every window glowed with warm amber light, as perfect as a magazine cover. Inside the bags were 6 Chinese dishes she'd made with her own hands, working from 5 in the morning until 3 in the afternoon. 2 blisters had risen on her fingers from steam burns. Eleanor had said on the phone, "Zoe, for the Thanksgiving dinner, could you handle the Asian portion? That's what you're good at, isn't it?" What she was good at. As if a woman who grew up in China was naturally destined to stand in a kitchen. Zoe took a deep breath and walked up the private driveway toward the front door. Snow settled in her hair, melting into icy water that trickled down her neck and into her coat collar. She had no hand free for an umbrella, both were occupied with food. The maid who opened the door wore a uniform and barely glanced at her. She didn't even say, "Madam," just stepped aside to create a narrow opening. The Vanderbilt living room was as vast as a hotel lobby. Beneath a crystal chandelier, more than 20 family members had already taken their seats. The men clustered around the fireplace discussing stocks and politics, while the women sipped champagne and debated whether to ski in Switzerland next winter or buy a vineyard in the south of France. No one looked toward the door. "Zoe's here." Eleanor's voice drifted from the center of the crowd, elegant and cool. "Take the food to the kitchen. The staff will handle it." Zoe smiled, nodded, and crossed the entire living room toward the kitchen. She could feel gazes falling on her back like a light rain, that particular upper-class scrutiny reserved for outsiders. A cousin she barely knew whispered something behind a cupped hand, another laughed behind her champagne flute. Zoe kept walking. In the kitchen, the real Thanksgiving feast was already prepared: turkey, lobster, Kobe beef, executed by a Michelin-starred chef flown in from New York. Her braised pork ribs, kung pao chicken, and garlic shrimp with vermicelli were relegated to a side counter, adjacent to the leftover station designated for the servants. "Zoe." A hand landed on her shoulder. She turned. Her husband Christian Vanderbilt stood behind her, wearing a cashmere sweater, a glass of whiskey in hand. His blonde hair was immaculately combed, and he was handsome enough to step straight out of a Ralph Lauren advertisement. Handsome, she thought, and utterly useless when it mattered. "Mom wants you to put the food away and come out," he said in a low voice. "Everyone's waiting for you to make a toast." Waiting for me, or waiting for my food? Christian's brow furrowed slightly. "Don't be like that." Zoe didn't argue further. She arranged the dishes, washed her hands, and followed her husband back to the living room. Eleanor, seeing her return empty-handed, nodded with satisfaction and tapped a silver spoon against her champagne flute. Everyone. The entire living room fell silent. "Before we begin our Thanksgiving dinner, I'd like to take this opportunity to announce something." Eleanor's gaze shifted to Zoe, a smile on her lips that could almost be called maternal. But Zoe knew that smile too well. It was the exact expression her mother-in-law wore whenever she was about to deliver a public lesson. "Zoe has been part of our family for 3 years now. In that time, she has been a considerate daughter-in-law." Eleanor paused. The pause was carefully calculated, just long enough to hang a "but" in the air. But the Vanderbilt family has Vanderbilt traditions. Every generation's matron needs to possess the appropriate capabilities and background. So I'm delighted to announce, to help Zoe integrate more fully into our family, I've decided to send her to a finishing school in Switzerland for 1 year. She'll enroll next autumn. Polite applause rippled through the room. Several of the Vanderbilt women exchanged knowing glances. One of Christian's aunts actually clapped with visible enthusiasm. Zoe stood frozen in place, as if nailed to the floor. She knew that finishing school, a palace-like estate in the Swiss Alps that taught wealthy young women how to smile, how to arrange flowers, how to select the correct chair at a formal dinner. Tuition was $500,000 a year, and the alumni list was a catalogue of fated aristocratic descendants. Eleanor's message was unmistakable: you don't measure up, and you need to be remade. "Mom," Christian said, his voice tinged with embarrassment, "shouldn't we discuss this privately? I've already paid the tuition." Eleanor cut him off, her smile still perfect. "Consider it a gift to Zoe. After all, we all know her background is somewhat different." Somewhat different. Those 3 words pierced Zoe's ears like needles. Over 3 years, she had heard countless similar phrases: special circumstances, cultural differences, needs time to adjust, each one delivered with exquisite politeness, each one reminding her that she would always be an outsider. "Thank you, Mom." Zoe heard herself speak. Her voice was steady, even carrying a hint of a smile. "But I don't think I'll need to go to Switzerland." The applause stopped. A few guests who'd been raising their glasses froze mid-motion. Eleanor's eyebrows rose slightly. "Oh? Because I've already been to school in America." Zoe's voice remained soft, like a spring breeze across water. "An MBA from MIT should be sufficient to handle Vanderbilt dinner party etiquette, wouldn't you think?" The living room fell so still that she could hear snow falling against the windows. Someone's champagne flute clinked nervously against a saucer. A log shifted in the fireplace, sending up a shower of sparks. Eleanor's smile froze for a fraction of a second. Clearly, she hadn't known. Christian had never told his family what kind of woman he'd married. An MBA from MIT. The speaker was Christian's sister Cornelia, a 23-year-old Dartmouth graduate with the sky-high arrogance of someone who'd never been told no. "Zoe, you're joking, right? Didn't you grow up in Chinatown?" "Yes." Zoe smiled. "Flushing, Chinatown. My parents ran a small restaurant, and I grew up helping in the kitchen. That didn't stop me from getting a full scholarship to MIT at 17. Cornelia's face flushed a deep, unbecoming red. She opened her mouth, closed it, then opened it again, but nothing came out. The atmosphere turned complicated. The Vanderbilt women were accustomed to their superiority, accustomed to viewing Zoe as someone who needed to be elevated. Discovering that this woman who needed elevating had better credentials than any of them was distinctly uncomfortable. A couple of cousins suddenly found their champagne flutes intensely interesting. Education is only one aspect. Eleanor recovered her composure quickly, though her smile had lost some of its warmth. "Darling, I'm not questioning your intelligence. It's just that the matriarch of the Vanderbilt family needs some more practical capabilities. Asset management, charitable foundation operations, business negotiations, these sorts of things. After all, Christian will inherit the family enterprise one day, and his wife should be able to assist him, not." Her gaze drifted pointedly across Zoe's hands. Those hands indeed didn't look like a society matron's, although she'd taken meticulous care of them for 3 years. The faint calluses at the base of her fingers remained, relics of childhood days washing dishes for her parents. "Just be a pretty ornament." The last few words landed lightly, like a dropped glove. Someone in the back actually snickered. The Vanderbilts exchanged glances throughout the room. Someone muffled a laugh behind their hand. Christian stood nearby, his lips moving slightly, but ultimately he said nothing. Zoe looked at her husband. For 3 years, every time her mother-in-law had humiliated her in public, Christian had chosen silence. He'd said it was for family harmony, that arguing with his mother would only make things worse. She had tried to understand, to make allowances for a man raised in the shadow of a domineering mother. But today, she was done making allowances. "Mom is right." Zoe's voice remained gentle, but something in her eyes had shifted. "The Vanderbilt matriarch does need practical capabilities. Which is why I also have an announcement. She pulled her phone from her coat pocket, opened an email, and cast it to the enormous television on the living room wall. It was an appointment letter. Vanderbilt Asset Management, the family's core enterprise, its largest single shareholder, formally appointed a new CEO this morning. Zoe read from the email, her tone as calm as a weather report. This new CEO will assume full operational control and investment decision-making authority. Eleanor's expression changed. What are you talking about? Who has that authority? The shareholder holding 63% of Vanderbilt Asset Management's shares. Zoe tapped her phone screen, and the television displayed an ownership chart. 7 years ago, when Vanderbilt Asset Management was on the verge of bankruptcy, an anonymous investor injected $4.7 billion through a 7-layer offshore structure, acquiring 63% equity and becoming the controlling shareholder. And that anonymous investor, she turned to face the roomful of stunned Vanderbilts, was me. A wine glass shattered somewhere in the back. Someone's champagne flute had slipped through nerveless fingers. The sound was sharp and final. Deathly stillness descended. The crystal chandelier above cast intersecting shadows across every face, some slack with shock, others pale with dawning horror. Eleanor stood amid the crowd, her champagne glass tilting dangerously, the wine threatening to spill. Christian gaped like a beached fish, his drink forgotten in his hand. "You're lying." Cornelia's voice rose to a near shriek. "How could you possibly have that much money?" "At 17, I invested my first saved scholarship money in 3 tech startups. One of them was called DeepMind, later sold to Google for $600 million. Zoe's tone remained pleasant, as if recounting someone else's story. "Of course, that was only the beginning. What really built my wealth was a quantitative trading algorithm I created at 18. That algorithm currently manages over $80 billion in assets on Wall Street. Its name is the Inning Matrix." A sharp intake of breath from Mr. Williams, the white-haired family friend who'd been a director since the 1980s. His face had gone the color of old parchment. Clearly, several of them recognized the name. The Ning Matrix was one of the most legendary quant funds on Wall Street over the past decade, with annualized returns exceeding 35%, and a client list including the Saudi Sovereign Wealth Fund, the Norwegian pension system, and Harvard's endowment. Its founder had never appeared publicly and was known to Forbes as the Ghost of Wall Street. The very ghost who'd been serving them tea for 3 years. "So you see, Mom," Zoe tucked her phone away, her smile still winsome, "I probably don't need finishing school in Switzerland. Because..." She walked up to Eleanor and gently took the nearly spilled champagne glass from the older woman's hand. "The real money in this family has always been mine." If time could reverse, Zoe thought, she would have turned and walked away on that rainy night 3 years ago. It was June in New York, and she'd met Christian Vanderbilt for the first time at a Columbia Business School alumni event. He wore a navy suit, his blonde hair damp from rain, looking slightly out of place among all the ambitious MBAs. He'd come as a friend's +1, and after 2 martinis, he'd blushed and said to her, "You know, I feel like everyone here is pretending to be someone they're not." She'd laughed at the time. Because she was pretending to be just another talented Columbia Business School student, pretending the Ning Matrix didn't exist, pretending that the Wall Street ghost with billions in accumulated wealth was merely a legend. Christian pursued her for 6 months. Not with money, he didn't know she had any then, but with awkward sincerity. He remembered every book she'd casually mentioned enjoying, drove 3 hours through a blizzard to Philadelphia to buy the barbecued pork buns she'd loved as a child, and waited quietly outside her office building until early morning with a hot milk tea when she worked late. He'd stand there in the cold, not even texting her to hurry, just waiting like it was the most natural thing in the world. "I know I don't deserve you." The day he proposed, he knelt by the lake in Central Park, his knees sinking into the snow. "I mean, you're so smart, so brilliant, and all I have is a last name. But I swear I'll spend my life loving you, protecting you, and never letting anyone hurt you. She'd believed him. God help her, she'd believed every word. They married at City Hall with only 2 witnesses. Eleanor flew into a rage when she heard and refused to attend. Zoe remembered Christian leaning against the wall after that phone call, his face drained of all color. My mother said if I don't cancel the wedding, she'll cut off my trust fund. What are you going to do? She'd asked. Christian was silent for a long time. Then he said, I can live without a trust fund. But I can't live without you. They married the next day anyway. Christian signed a prenuptial agreement, she'd insisted, wanting to protect her assets. He'd signed without even reading it. I'm marrying you, he said, not your money. 3 months after the wedding, Eleanor's attitude suddenly softened. She invited the young couple to move into the Westport mansion, saying she wanted to get to know her daughter-in-law properly. Zoe had thought it was genuine affection at the time. Only later did she discover it was because Vanderbilt Asset Management had started experiencing cash flow problems around then. Eleanor needed money. And Zoe happened to have it. But she chose silence. Christian said he didn't want his family knowing his wife's true identity. They'll find all kinds of ways to ask you for money, and I don't want you trapped in that situation. He'd said it so sincerely, his eyes red-rimmed, and she believed him once again. So she became that poor girl from Chinatown, the least significant member of the Vanderbilt family. She wore the brands her mother-in-law specified, learned the elaborate table manners, smiled quietly at family gatherings, and endured the veiled and not-so-veiled contempt. She became invisible in a room full of people who'd built their lives on her money. Every time she wanted to reveal the truth. But Christian would always hold her hand and say, just hold on a little longer. Once Mom's health improves, once the company stabilizes, I'll tell her myself. She waited 3 years. Until tonight. How dare you? Eleanor's voice jolted Zoe back to the present. The Vanderbilt matriarch had finally shed her mask of elegance, her face pure fury. You've been infiltrating our family for 3 years, just waiting for this moment. Infiltrating? Zoe set down the champagne glass gently. Was it my idea to move in? Was it my idea to hide my identity? Her gaze shifted to Christian. His face was as white as the snow beyond the windows. It was you. She spoke each word distinctly. You told me to hold on a little longer. You told me to wait for the right time. Every time your mother humiliated me, you stood there and watched. You watched, Christian. You never said a word. Christian's lips trembled. Zoe, You remind me of my mother. Zoe's voice suddenly turned soft. She stood in a Flushing kitchen for 30 years, and the grease fumes destroyed her lungs. After my father died, she held our family together alone, waking at 4 every morning to make broth and closing at 11 at night. She put me through the best schools and made me who I am today. But to your family, she was just that woman who runs a restaurant in Chinatown. The living room was terrifyingly quiet. Even the fire seemed to have dimmed. I married you because I thought you were different. Zoe looked at Christian, and finally tears glistened in her eyes. I thought you could see me as a person, not my background. I thought when you said, protect, you meant it. But for 3 years, every time your mother humiliated me in public, what did you do? You stood there, head down, like a silent wax figure. Zoe. Christian stepped forward, reaching for her hand. Zoe stepped back, widening the distance. Tonight, your mother announced she was sending me to finishing school. Did you know in advance? Christian's silence was answer enough. You knew. Zoe laughed bitterly. You knew, and you didn't stop her. Maybe you thought it was a good idea, to send your wife to learn how to be worthy of your family. No. Christian said urgently. I thought. Enough. Zoe raised her hand, cutting him off. 3 years is enough. I don't want to hear any more excuses. She turned to Eleanor. Her mother-in-law's expression had shifted from fury to something more complex, perhaps fear. After all, a daughter-in-law who controlled the family's economic lifeline was a very different creature from one who could be pushed around at will. Mom, Zoe's voice regained its composure, you said earlier that the Vanderbilt matriarch needs practical capabilities. I agree. So from now on, I will personally exercise my rights as the majority shareholder. My first decision is, Vanderbilt Asset Management will undergo a full audit, including all related party transactions and fund flows over the past 7 years. Eleanor's face went pale. Everyone in the room knew what this meant. Over the past 7 years, they had borrowed how much money from the company, how many shady deals had they done, only they knew. The silence was deafening. You can't do that. Cornelia shrieked. This is our family company. It stopped being that 7 years ago. Zoe said calmly. 7 years ago, if I hadn't injected capital, this company would have gone bankrupt. This house you live in, the luxury cars you drive, the annual trips to St. Bart's, all of it was supported by my money. You just didn't know it. She picked up her purse from the sofa and walked toward the door. Zoe. Christian caught up and grabbed her wrist. Let's talk about this, give me a chance. Zoe stopped and looked back at him. This man she'd loved for 3 years suddenly seemed like a stranger. You know what, Christian, she said softly. I don't need you to give me a chance. Because it was never about whether you'd give it. The question is, are you still worth me staying? She gently freed her wrist and pushed open the door. The snow outside had grown heavier. Zoe walked down the private driveway, the brightly lit white mansion behind her, the 24 stunned Vanderbilts inside it, the period at the end of a 3-year marriage. She didn't cry. Because she still remembered who she was. Connecticut's snowy night stretched on endlessly. Zoe drove away from Westport, heading south on I-95. The heater was on full blast, but she still felt cold, a cold that came from deep within, from the chill of being betrayed by the person she'd trusted most. Her phone rang. It was her mother, Susan. Zhao Zhao. Happy Thanksgiving. Her mother's voice, tinged with a Fujian accent, came through the line, background noise from the Flushing restaurant audible behind it. Did you eat turkey? We don't really understand this American holiday. The restaurant's been crazy busy today, just sent out the last batch of customers. Mom. Zoe said, her throat tightening. The background noise suddenly stopped. Susan was silent for 2 seconds, then said, What's wrong? Did those people bully you again? Zoe had always been terrified of her mother detecting tears over the phone, because her mother had a supernatural ability to hear emotions. Right now she bit her lip, struggling to hold back the heat in her eyes. Nothing. I just miss you. Liar. Susan sighed. When you insisted on marrying him 3 years ago, I told you, people like that won't treat you sincerely. You didn't believe me. Now you've learned the hard way. Zoe didn't answer. She pulled over to the side of the road. Snow fell thickly outside, the wipers swinging back and forth with a monotonous rhythm. Mom, I want to ask you something. Ask. Why didn't you stop me back then? The line was silent for a long while. Then Susan said, because the biggest regret of my life was listening to your grandfather and not marrying the man I truly loved. So I swore my daughter would marry whoever she wanted. Even if it was a mistake, it had to be her own fall. Zoe's tears finally broke free. Mom. Don't cry. Susan's voice suddenly turned firm. My daughter doesn't let people push her around. When you were little in Flushing, you fought those white boys, 1 against 3, and you weren't scared. Now you have money, and you let people walk all over you. I'm not scared. Then do what you need to do. Susan said. You always knew what you wanted, even as a child. You're stronger than me. Go. The call ended. Zoe stared at the snow outside the window and suddenly remembered something from when she was 11. She'd just transferred to a public elementary school in Flushing, and 3 white boys had cornered her on the way home, calling her a cat-eating chink. She'd dropped her backpack and thrown a punch at the biggest one's nose, a move she'd learned from watching the restaurant kitchen staff, and the other 2 had run away screaming. That night, her mother had scolded her while applying medicine to her bruised knuckles. Then, after the scolding, she'd proudly told the restaurant staff, "My daughter, she even wins fights." Zoe wiped her tears and restarted the engine. Over the years, she'd learned many things: elegance, restraint, how to use the 3rd fork correctly at a Vanderbilt dinner party. But some things she shouldn't have forgotten. She was Susan Lynn's daughter, a daughter of Flushing Chinatown. The blood in her veins had never known how to accept subjugation. The next morning. Thanksgiving Day. Vanderbilt Asset Management's headquarters occupied an entire floor of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. Though it was a holiday, when Zoe swiped her card to enter, she found the office full of people, all the senior executives, every board member, summoned urgently by Eleanor. Eleanor stood at the head of the conference table. When she saw Zoe push through the door, her expression was like someone who'd swallowed a fly. "You came." Eleanor sneered. "What, didn't sleep well last night and came here to vent?" Zoe ignored her, walking straight to the other end of the table and taking a seat among the guests. She wore a white suit, her hair swept back in a low ponytail, no makeup except for a slash of red lipstick. That touch of red made her look like a different person. "Let's begin," she said. "Begin what?" Eleanor asked warily. "A special shareholder meeting of Vanderbilt Asset Management." Zoe pulled a stack of documents from her briefcase. According to Article 13 of the company's bylaws, any shareholder holding more than 51% of shares has the right to convene a shareholder meeting at any time and any place. I, Zoe Lynn, as the beneficial holder of 63% of the company's shares, now convene this meeting. There is one agenda item: removal of the current board and re-election. The conference room erupted. "Are you insane?" Cornelia shrieked. "Today is Thanksgiving. All the lawyers are on holiday." "My lawyers are not on holiday," Zoe said calmly. "They're waiting in the lobby downstairs. I can have them come up if you need." Eleanor's hands pressed against the conference table, her knuckles white. "Zoe Lynn, don't get too arrogant. Even if you hold 63%, Vanderbilt Asset Management is incorporated in Delaware and governed by U.S. corporate law. You're just a Chinese." "Eleanor." Zoe interrupted her, using her mother-in-law's first name for the first time. "I suggest you think carefully about what you're about to say. Because under New York state anti-discrimination laws, workplace discrimination based on race or national origin is illegal. Everyone in this room is a witness." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Zoe pushed the documents to the center of the table. "Here are the share certificates, the company bylaws, and my proposal as the majority shareholder. The proposed new board list is also inside." A white-haired senior director picked up the documents, flipped through a few pages, and his expression changed. "This can't be the Ning Matrix. You're the founder of the Ning Matrix?" "Yes, Mr. Williams." Zoe nodded to him. He was one of the few who'd always treated her decently. "I started it at 18. It's been 12 years now." Gasps rippled around the conference room. Everyone here had spent decades in finance, and no one was unfamiliar with the name Ning Matrix. Eleanor's face went from pale to green. A horrifying realization dawned on her: if Zoe Lynn really was the founder of the Ning Matrix, her personal fortune must exceed $20 billion. This meant that every humiliation she'd inflicted on her daughter-in-law over the past 3 years had been directed at a woman 100 times wealthier than herself. But that's not today's focus. Zoe's voice pulled everyone's attention back. The focus is, what happened to Vanderbilt Asset Management over the past 7 years? She produced another document, this one thicker. This is a preliminary audit report commissioned from PwC. The report shows that over the past 7 years, Eleanor Vanderbilt transferred a total of over $420 million from the company to personal accounts and family funds under the guise of management fees, consulting fees, and related party transactions. At least $80 million of that was used to purchase personal real estate, including. Zoe opened the report to a page and read aloud: the Vanderbilt Mansion renovation in Westport, $12 million, the Hamptons Beach House, $35 million, the Colorado Ski Resort, $28 million. All these properties are registered in Eleanor's personal name, unrelated to the company. Dead silence in the conference room. Eleanor stood there like a wax figure cracking apart. "This is criminal," Mr. Williams said quietly. "Yes, it is criminal." Zoe closed the report. Embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, false statements, under federal sentencing guidelines, with an amount exceeding $400 million, the sentence would be approximately 15 to 20 years. "You have no evidence," Eleanor suddenly shrieked. "Those were all legitimate management compensation, approved by the board." "Were they?" Zoe raised an eyebrow. "Then where are the board meeting minutes approving these compensations?" "I searched the entire company archive. Over the past 7 years, there were 12 supposed board approvals. 11 of them have no meeting minutes. And the 12th, the signature page and the main document don't match." She pulled another document from her briefcase and held it up. "Eleanor, you forged board resolutions." The air in the conference room seemed to freeze. Everyone present understood the weight of those words. Forging company documents was a federal felony, even more serious than embezzlement. If convicted, Eleanor would spend the rest of her life in federal prison. Cornelia's face was the color of ash. She tugged at her mother's arm and whispered, "Mom, tell her about that trust fund." "Shut up," Eleanor barked. But it was too late. Zoe's ears had caught that word. Trust fund. She frowned. "What trust fund?" Cornelia clamped her mouth shut, but her eyes betrayed her, that unmistakable panic of a secret exposed. Zoe's gaze swept back and forth between mother and daughter. Suddenly, a thought flashed through her mind. Many puzzling details from the past 3 years clicked into place: why Eleanor had done a complete about-face 3 months after cutting ties, why Christian had insisted she hide her identity, why the entire family seemed abnormally interested in her financial information. It couldn't be. Zoe slowly turned her head to look toward the conference room door. Christian was standing there. No one knew when he'd arrived. He wore yesterday's clothes, unshaven, clearly having not slept all night. He stood in the doorframe like a man awaiting sentencing. "Zoe," his voice was hoarse, "we need to talk. Privately." Christian took her to a small cafe in Lower Manhattan. It was a place they'd frequented when they were first married, run by a kindly Italian grandmother who always gave them extra cookies. "Remember this place?" He sat down, attempting a smile. Zoe didn't smile. "Talk." Christian's smile faltered. He stared at his coffee cup for a long time, then said, 3 years ago, when we signed the prenup, my lawyer added a clause." "What clause?" "Under New York state marriage law, for marriages lasting more than 3 years, the non-at-fault party has a claim to the appreciation of the other spouse's premarital assets. That clause stipulated, if our marriage exceeded 3 years, I would be entitled to 30% of all investment gains you generated during that period." The cafe was warm, but Zoe felt ice spreading through her veins. 3 years. She remembered last night, Eleanor announcing she was sending her to Switzerland for a year. If she went for a year, that would make exactly 3 years. Then Christian could file for divorce and claim a third of her asset appreciation. And over those 3 years, the Ning matrix had grown by more than $6 billion. So, this was a plan all along. Her voice was barely audible. From the very beginning, all of you were plotting this. No. Christian said urgently. That clause was added by the lawyer. I didn't even know about it at the time. But you found out later. Zoe cut him off. When did you find out? Christian opened his mouth, but no sound came out. When? Zoe's voice suddenly rose, and other customers in the cafe turned to look. A year ago. Christian dropped his head. My mother discovered you were the founder of the Ning matrix. She forced me. She said if I didn't cooperate, she'd bankrupt the company and leave every Vanderbilt on the street. She said I was the family heir, that I had a responsibility. Your responsibility was to conspire with your family to steal my money. I wasn't trying to steal. Christian's voice rose too, his eyes reddening. I love you. I genuinely love you. I struggled every day this past year, telling myself there'd be another way, delaying, refusing to file for divorce. Until last night when your mother announced she was sending me to Switzerland. Zoe's voice turned cold. 1 year. Exactly 3 years. And then what? When I came back from Switzerland, you'd be waiting with divorce papers, right? Christian dropped his head, his shoulders shaking violently. He didn't deny it. Zoe looked at this man, the man she'd loved for 3 years, the man who'd promised to protect her with his life. It turned out his version of protection was protecting her while his family conspired to steal from her. You know what, she said quietly, you didn't need to go through all this trouble. Christian looked up, eyes blurred with tears. If you'd told me 3 years ago that your family needed money, I would have given it. I had so much, what did a little matter? Because I loved you. Zoe's voice suddenly cracked. But you chose the most hurtful way, you made me into a complete joke. Zoe. You know what the most ridiculous part is? She looked at him, tears in her eyes but a smile on her lips. The most ridiculous part is, that prenup clause your Vanderbilts were so proud of, it was completely pointless. Christian was stunned. What? My assets have never been in my name. Zoe stood up and pulled a document from her bag, placing it on the table. All equity in the Ning matrix, and all my global investments, belong to a charitable trust registered in the Cayman Islands. I'm the executor of this trust, but not the beneficiary. The beneficiaries are 1,300 community libraries across America, STEM education programs in 200 public schools, and all uninsured low-income children in New York State. Christian flipped through the document, his hands starting to shake. Which means, legally, I own nothing. Zoe said softly. Every cent I have, until the day I die, belongs to those children in need. Your 30% clause, there's nothing to take. Christian looked up, his face ashen. Why? His voice was ragged. Why did you put all your money in a charitable trust? Zoe looked at him and suddenly found the question itself absurd. Because when I was 11, the Flushing Public School Library closed. No funding. Her voice was calm. 400 kids in that school, most of them children of immigrants like me, whose parents couldn't afford to buy books. My mother taught me to read at night from the backs of restaurant menus, using soy sauce as ink. She pulled a faded photograph from her wallet and placed it on the table. It showed a young Zoe standing beside a small cart stacked with old books. A piece of cardboard hung from the cart with words scrawled in crooked letters, Flushing Children's Free Library. I was 10 that year. I went to flea markets collecting old books people didn't want, then set up that library on the street corner. The first day, I lent out only 2 books, Charlotte's Web and The Little Prince. She put away the photograph and straightened up. So, Christian, do you understand now? The money your family was scheming for, it was never mine. It belongs to every child who grew up poor like me. What you were trying so hard to take wasn't my property, it was their hope. The cafe had gone very quiet. The Italian grandmother behind the counter had stopped wiping glasses and was staring at her. Zoe picked up her bag and turned to leave. Zoe! Christian chased her to the door, grabbing her hand in the heavy snow. I know I was wrong, please give me one more chance. Let go. Zoe. Let go. Zoe turned, her eyes like blades of ice. Christian Vanderbilt, from the moment you chose to conspire with your mother against me, there was nothing left between us. Let go now, with some dignity. Otherwise. She didn't finish. But Christian saw something in her eyes that made a chill run down his spine. He let go. Zoe turned and walked into the heavy snow. Her back was straight, her step steady, and she never looked back. Christian stood there, watching her figure gradually disappear into the snow. He suddenly remembered the day he proposed, by the lake in Central Park. She'd worn an old sweater, her nose red from cold, and when she heard his vows, there were stars in her eyes. She'd said, I do. Back then, he'd still deserved those words. The divorce proceeded quickly. No property disputes, because there was nothing to divide. No alimony disputes. Zoe voluntarily offered Christian a settlement sum, on condition that he waive all claims against the charitable trust in the divorce agreement. Christian didn't negotiate. He signed quietly. The last time Zoe saw Christian was outside the law firm. He'd lost a lot of weight, his eyes sunken, like a stray dog someone had left behind. Can I ask you one more question? He said. Zoe stopped but didn't turn around. Did you ever truly love me? Snow began falling again, settling between them like a silent wall. Zoe was silent for a long time. Then she said, I did. But you didn't deserve it. She walked toward her car, where Vivian Chen, her assistant at the Ning Matrix, a young woman of Chinese heritage, opened the door for her. Ms. Lin, everything's arranged, Vivian said. The gifts will all be delivered by this afternoon. Thank you. Zoe settled into the car, watching Christian's shrinking figure through the window. Let's go. Where to? Flushing. I want my mother's noodles. That same afternoon, 7 special gifts arrived at 7 different Vanderbilt addresses. The first gift arrived at the Vanderbilt mansion in Westport. Eleanor's hands were shaking as she opened the elegant rectangular box. Inside was a property deed. The Georgian mansion she'd lived in for 40 years had been foreclosed on by the bank last month. The reason, Vanderbilt Asset Management, as the property's guarantor, had exercised its mortgage rights. And the company's majority shareholder was Zoe Lin. Which meant the legal owner of this house now was the daughter-in-law she'd once despised most. Also in the box was a handwritten note in elegant script. Dear Eleanor. You once said the Vanderbilt matriarch needs to understand how to manage assets. I couldn't agree more. So I thought letting you experience being managed might be the best lesson. Don't worry about where to stay. I've rented an apartment for you in the Bronx, 3 months prepaid. It's close to Flushing. If you're interested, you can visit the neighborhood where I grew up. Wishing you a wonderful new life. Zoe Lin. Eleanor tore the note into shreds. The fragments flew through the air like another snowstorm. But the deed, that remained. The house was gone. 40 years of her life, reduced to a piece of paper in a box. The second gift arrived at Cornelia's luxury apartment near Dartmouth. Inside was a student loan agreement. Cornelia discovered that the college tuition she'd believed her parents paid had actually all been misappropriated from Vanderbilt Asset Management under the guise of employee training expenses, and the new board now deemed it improper expenditure to be recovered. She had 30 days to repay the $450,000 or face civil litigation. The note read, "Dear Cornelia, you called me from Chinatown. Yes, I am, and proud of it. In Flushing, we believe in a simple principle: pay your own debts. Best wishes for your studies. Zoe Lynn." Cornelia stared at the document, her manicured fingers trembling. She'd spent that money on designer handbags, on spring break in Cancun, on things she'd never once considered the price of. Now the price had found her. The third gift arrived at Christian's uncle Robert Vanderbilt, the senior consultant, drawing a $7 million annual salary despite not having shown up for work in 10 years. Inside was a termination notice and a police report filing. The report related to his use of fraudulent invoices to siphon company funds, amounting to over $3 million. The note read, "Uncle Robert. At last year's Christmas dinner, you asked me if I knew how to make General Tso's chicken. That was the only question I never answered. Let me answer it now. No. But I do know how to do something else. Call the police. Zoe Lynn." Robert was said to have smashed an antique vase after reading it. The vase, it turned out, had also been purchased with company funds. The fourth, fifth, and sixth gifts arrived at other family members who'd participated in scheming against Zoe. Each one precisely struck at their weakest points: evidence of embezzlement, debt demands, crime reports. Each came with a handwritten note, the tone alternating between gentle and sarcastic, like a carefully orchestrated symphony. One cousin received a bill for the private jet charter she'd charged to the company, another received a copy of his mistress's confession about the offshore accounts. Every stone had been overturned, every skeleton pulled from the closet. The final gift, the seventh, arrived for Christian. When the courier delivered an ordinary cardboard box to his temporary apartment, he hesitated a long time before opening it. There were no legal documents in the box. No insulting notes. Just 3 things. The first was the ring he'd given her on the day he proposed. A plain platinum band with a tiny inscription inside, "You are my home." It lay in a small jewelry box, looking unworn, because she'd kept it in her safe, too precious to wear. He picked it up, and the metal was cold against his palm, but he remembered the weight of it in his own hand the day he'd slipped it on her finger. The second was a photo album. He opened the first page, a photo from when they were dating. By the lake in Central Park, he was holding up his phone for a selfie, her head resting on his shoulder, smiling radiantly. He kept turning the pages: their wedding, outside City Hall, no wedding dress, just a white skirt and 2 bouquets of sunflowers. The day they moved to Westport, she was in the kitchen learning to cook turkey, her face covered in flour. Every moment had been carefully printed and organized in chronological order. He could see, in the careful placement of each photograph, the love she'd poured into this album, the love he'd taken for granted. When he reached the last page, he froze. There was no photo there. Just a note. But unlike the other 6 gifts, this note had only 3 words, slightly blurred by water stains. "Me too." Christian hugged the album and sobbed. He sobbed like a child, his shoulders heaving, his tears soaking into the pages that held memories of a woman he'd lost through his own cowardice. The sound was raw, animal, the grief of someone who had everything once and chose to throw it away. He suddenly understood why she'd sent these 7 gifts. 6 were revenge. 1 was goodbye. Revenge for those who had hurt her, clean, legal, surgical. And goodbye for him, the man she'd once loved deeply, who had destroyed everything himself. She was telling him this: "I'm taking revenge on everyone else. Except you. Because you're the only one who doesn't need revenge, you've already lost me." Afternoon sun was shining directly onto the cash register at 3 o'clock. The restaurant had passed its lunch rush, with only 2 old men sitting in the corner slowly sipping oolong tea. The air smelled of braised meat and 5-spice powder, a scent she'd never find in the Vanderbilt mansion's French chef's kitchen. Susan Lin was hunched over the cash register doing accounts. Without looking up, she called out, "Have a seat, the menu's on the..." "Mom." Susan looked up, her reading glasses sliding down her nose. She stared at her daughter for a long moment. "How did you get so thin?" That was the first thing she said. Then she took off her glasses, came around the counter, and pulled her daughter into an embrace. Zoe smelled her mother's familiar scent, soy sauce, star anise, and laundry soap. It was the smell of Flushing, the smell of her real home. "Have you eaten?" Susan's second question. "No." "Sit. I'll make you noodles." Susan turned and walked into the kitchen, moving with the same brisk efficiency as 30 years ago. Zoe sat at the table she'd sat at as a child, watching her mother through the kitchen window. Water was boiling in the pot, and white steam fogged the glass. She remembered that she'd bought this restaurant when she was 17. With the first money she'd made from investing in DeepMind, she'd bought this storefront from a retiring Korean owner as a birthday gift for her mother. But Susan insisted the deed be in her daughter's name. "Your money bought it, so it's yours," she'd said. All these years, Susan still woke at 4 every morning to hand-select ingredients at the market. She could have hired someone to manage it, but she refused. "This is the restaurant your father left me," she said. "I promised him, as long as I live, these doors stay open." A steaming bowl of beef noodles appeared in front of Zoe, topped with a perfectly soft boiled egg. She bent her head and ate, tears splashing into the bowl. The broth was rich and warm, and it tasted like childhood, like safety, like everything she'd been missing. Susan sat down beside her without asking anything. Only after her daughter had finished most of the noodles did she say, "Made up your mind?" "Made up." Zoe put down her chopsticks. "I'm getting divorced." "I figured." Susan sighed. "And then what?" Zoe was silent for a moment. Then she pulled a document from her bag and handed it to her mother. Susan put on her reading glasses and studied it carefully. It was a restaurant deed and a business plan. "Mom, remember how you always wanted to open a real Chinese restaurant, not the kind that serves General Tso's chicken and spring rolls to Americans, but real food, like Grandma used to make in Fuzhou?" Susan's gaze froze on the pages. "That's just a dream," she said. "A restaurant like that in Flushing would close in 3 days." "Not Flushing anymore. Manhattan." Zoe flipped the plan to a page. "Here, 11th Avenue and 24th Street. I bought the whole building. 1st and 2nd floors are the restaurant. 3rd and 4th are cooking classrooms and community event space. The name of the restaurant is Susan." Susan took off her reading glasses, her eyes reddening. "Zhao Zhao. Mom, I have a lot of money." Zoe held her mother's rough hands. "Money can't make me happy, I learned that over the past 3 years. But money can make other people happy. Your cooking, Grandma's recipes passed down to you, shouldn't stay buried in this little restaurant. They deserve to stand on the busiest street in Manhattan, showing the whole world what real Chinese food tastes like." Outside the window, the setting sun painted Flushing streets gold. Susan looked at her daughter and suddenly realized that the little girl who used to do homework in the restaurant kitchen had grown into a strong, gentle woman she barely recognized. "Your grandfather used to say, 'What's the point of girls getting so much education? They'll get married anyway.'" Susan wiped her eyes. "If he could see you today, how wrong he'd feel." Mother and daughter both laughed. The sound was warm, healing, like the first break of sunlight after a long storm. That night, Zoe sat in her childhood room, her laptop open. On the screen was an unfinished business plan, about the Ruotang Foundation. She'd put most of her wealth into the charitable trust, focused on providing educational support for children from low-income families. Starting from her own childhood experiences in Flushing, covering all of America, eventually reaching the world. But there was still one thing she needed to settle. Her phone buzzed. Vivian had sent an email. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York had filed charges. The audit results from Vanderbilt Asset Management's past 7 years had been referred to prosecutors, involving multiple federal felonies including embezzlement, document forgery, and tax fraud. Suspects included Eleanor Vanderbilt, Robert Vanderbilt, and 5 other family members. All gifts delivered, Vivian wrote at the end of the email. 6 signed for. The 7th delivered as well. Zoe closed her laptop and walked to the window. Flushing at night was completely different from Manhattan. No skyscrapers, no neon lights flashing all night, just low brick buildings and warm yellow street lamps on corners. In the distance came the rumble of the number 7 train passing by, the lifeline that carried countless immigrants between Flushing and Manhattan every day. Her phone buzzed again. An unknown number. Ms. Lin, I'm a reporter from the New York Times. Regarding the Vanderbilt case, we've received a detailed whistleblower submission. We'd like to verify some facts. Zoe hung up. Not yet, she thought. Let the bullets fly a while longer. Christmas Eve. Manhattan had seen its heaviest snowfall of the year. Zoe sat in the second-floor private room of Susan, a table of untouched dishes before her. This was the restaurant's pre-opening tasting dinner, and she'd invited only a few people, her mother, Vivian, several old colleagues from Flushing, and a few trustees from the charitable foundation. Outside the window, snow fell heavily over 11th Avenue. Inside, warm yellow light and fragrant steam filled the room. Susan wore a new chef's coat and stood somewhat nervously by the table, accepting everyone's compliments. Her signature dishes came out one by one: Fuzhou fish balls, lychee pork, Buddha jumps over the wall, each earning admiration from everyone at the table. Auntie Susan, how do you make the fish ball skin so springy? Vivian asked between bites. Shark meat, beaten with ice for 4 hours. Susan showed a rare hint of pride. My mother taught me, she said back in Fuzhou, you only got to eat this at New Year's. Zoe watched the light on her mother's face and felt that everything had been worth it. Her phone buzzed. It was Anna Winter. Darling, I hear there's a new Chinese restaurant in Manhattan whose owner is Wall Street's most mysterious investor. Want me to send Vogue's food critic for a look? Zoe smiled and replied, be my guest. But my mother might ask if the critic knows how to use chopsticks. Just as she sent the message, the doorbell rang downstairs. Vivian went to answer. When she came back, her expression was complicated. She leaned down to Zoe's ear and whispered, it's the Vanderbilts. All of them. Zoe's smile faded for a moment. Let them in. The Vanderbilts filed into the private room like a defeated army. Eleanor led the way. She had lost weight, her designer coat hanging loosely on her frame, even her makeup couldn't hide the exhaustion around her eyes. Behind her came Cornelia, Robert, and others who'd received gifts. Christian wasn't with them. Please sit, Zoe said calmly. We're having a tasting. Please join us. The Vanderbilts exchanged glances and eventually sat down. Extra table settings were added, but no one touched their chopsticks. The atmosphere in the room was as awkward as congealed lard. Eleanor spoke first. We received the prosecutor's notice. The trial is next month. I know. Zoe picked up a fish ball with her chopsticks and chewed slowly. You've won. Eleanor's voice held the exhausted quality of something crushed. You've taken the company back. You've taken the house. You've got leverage over all of us. What more do you want? Zoe put down her chopsticks and wiped her mouth. Eleanor, do you think I did all this for revenge? Didn't you? Cornelia cut in sharply. Those 7 gifts. Gifts are gifts. Zoe interrupted her. Revenge is something else. If I wanted revenge, you wouldn't be sitting here tonight, you'd be spending Christmas Eve in a holding cell. That silenced every Vanderbilt in the room. They all knew it wasn't an empty threat. The audit report that had been sent to the U.S. Attorney's Office was enough to send all of them to prison. Then what do you want? Eleanor repeated the question, but her tone had shifted from accusation to something resembling pleading. Zoe stood and walked to the window. The snow had grown thick. Across the street, the Hudson River was invisible behind a white curtain. I want the truth, she said. About what? 3 years ago, why did Christian show up at that Columbia Business School alumni event? The room fell so quiet that Zoe could hear Eleanor swallow. It was an alumni event, she said with difficulty. He went with a friend. Eleanor. Zoe turned around, her gaze like a blade. Every word you just said could become testimony in court. I suggest you think carefully before answering. Eleanor's face turned ashen. Her lips moved a few times, and finally she slumped in her chair like a deflated balloon. I arranged it. Her voice was barely audible. I'd found out your identity, the company was having cash flow problems, I was desperate, and I happened to find your file on Forbes' hidden billionaires list. So. I sent Christian to get close to you. Zoe closed her eyes. Even though she'd guessed the answer, hearing it spoken aloud still felt like a dull blade across her heart. Go on. I gave him a detailed profile, your preferences, habits, schedule. I told him the future of the Vanderbilt family depended on him, that he had to marry you. Eleanor's voice grew smaller and smaller. At first he refused. But then he really fell in love with you. Love? Zoe let out a soft laugh, the sound carrying something heart-wrenching. Your idea of love is, after I trusted him completely, to plot with him how to extract $3 billion from me? That clause was my idea. Eleanor suddenly became agitated. Christian always wanted to remove it, he kept delaying the divorce. Sending you to Switzerland was to leave him with no way out. Enough. Zoe's voice wasn't loud, but the entire room fell silent. She walked over to Eleanor and looked down at the woman who had once been so formidable. For 3 years, this woman had made her fetch tea, learn rules, endure countless slights and humiliations. For 3 years, she'd thought it was because she wasn't good enough for this noble family. It turned out it was predator and prey all along. The hunter had simply chosen the wrong prey. I was going to send all of you to prison. Zoe's tone was as calm as if discussing the weather. The audit reports, bank statements, meeting recordings, all evidence ready. Federal prosecutors told me they've got a solid case. The Vanderbilts' faces drained of color. But I changed my mind. Zoe walked back to her seat and picked up a document from the table. Here's a settlement agreement. Conditions are as follows. 1. Vanderbilt Asset Management will be renamed Zhao Ning Capital. All Vanderbilt family members will withdraw from management. The company will repurchase your minority shares at market value. 2. For the funds misappropriated over the past 7 years, after recovering assets already seized, the balance will be repaid from your personal property, including the Hamptons Beach House and the Colorado Ski Resort. 3. Eleanor Vanderbilt will complete 500 hours of community service per year for the next 5 years. Location, Flushing Community Center. Eleanor's head shot up. Flushing? Yes. Zoe smiled. You've always told me I don't know American high society etiquette. I thought letting you see where I grew up might improve mutual understanding. The Flushing Community Center has many newly arrived immigrant families in need. You can teach English, or help with cleaning, or wash dishes. She let the last words land, her gaze drifting deliberately across her mother's hands. Susan sat at the other end of the table, quietly sipping soup, her expression unreadable. But Zoe knew her mother understood everything. What if I refuse? Eleanor lifted her chin, trying to summon a shred of her former arrogance. Then the settlement is void. Zoe's smile didn't disappear, but the temperature dropped below freezing. The trial proceeds as scheduled next week. And I will testify as the prosecution's key witness. Eleanor's arrogance deflated like a punctured balloon. She looked at the document, then at her family, then back at the document. There was no way out. There never had been. Cornelia couldn't help herself. This is extortion. No. Zoe said each word distinctly. This is mercy. She stood and raised her wine glass. The others at the table, confused, also raised theirs. Merry Christmas Eve. Zoe raised her glass. May we all become better people in the coming year. She drained the glass. The Vanderbilts hesitated, then finally drank as well. It was the bitterest drink they'd ever tasted. It was called defeat, it was called forgiveness, and it was called, you don't deserve it, but I'm letting you go anyway. New Year's Eve. Flushing. Zoe stood at the door of Lynn's kitchen, watching the temporary stage being erected across the street. The annual Flushing New Year's celebration would be held here tonight, and as the community's largest sponsor, she was scheduled to give a speech. Nervous? Vivian stood beside her, holding 2 cups of hot milk tea. A little. Zoe took one. When I was a kid watching these shows from the audience, I thought people on stage must be amazing. Now it's my turn, and I find out what it actually feels like, weak knees. Vivian laughed. You face down the entire Vanderbilt family. You can handle a few hundred people in the audience. The Vanderbilts were just 20 people. This is different. But she was smiling. Zoe's phone buzzed. It was Anna Winter again. Darling, Vogue's social section has a piece on Susan Restaurant tonight. Also, Time wants to put you on the January cover. This time you can't pass it off to that single mother. She has her own PR team now. Zoe sent back a smiley face. The streets were filling with people. Children waved glow sticks, and the air smelled of roasted chestnuts and fried noodles. This was Flushing's most festive night of the year, all ethnicities flooding the streets together to welcome the new year. Zoe, Vivian said suddenly, the Vanderbilts started their community service today. I know. Vivian hesitated. Eleanor was assigned to the community center kitchen. I heard she starts making Thanksgiving dinner for the homeless tomorrow, making up for the one she missed. Zoe looked into the distance. 1 street over was the Flushing Community Center. In the kitchen of that gray building, Eleanor Vanderbilt was tying on an apron. For the first time in 52 years, she stood before a sink facing mountains of dishes. Do you think she'll change? Vivian asked. I don't know. Zoe shook her head. But what matters isn't whether she changes, it's that I gave her the chance. That's enough. In the distance, fireworks exploded. The first volleys of the New Year's display were already rising into the sky. Gold and red light burst across the night sky over Flushing, illuminating countless upturned faces below. Zoe's phone buzzed again. She looked at the caller ID and froze. It was Christian. She hesitated for a long time, then finally answered. Zoe. His voice came through the speaker, hoarse and cautious. Happy New Year. Silence stretched across the connection. In the background, distant fireworks exploded over Manhattan. Happy New Year, she said. I got your album. He paused for a long time. Thank you. Zoe didn't answer. She didn't know what to say. You're welcome. I meant it. Or, I hope you suffer too. I started therapy, Christian said. Twice a week. The doctor says I have severe people-pleasing tendencies and maternal attachment issues. That's your problem, Christian. Her voice was calmer than she'd expected. It's not our problem anymore. I know. Another firework burst overhead, this time purple, illuminating the entire street. Zoe saw Vivian step tactfully away, giving her space. "Zoe, I want to say. I'm sorry." Christian's voice cracked. "Not for the scheming, I know that can never be forgiven. But for the 3 years, every time I should have stood up and didn't. Every time you looked at me for help and I pretended not to see. I'm a coward." Zoe closed her eyes. She'd finally heard those words. But they'd come too late for her to need them. "Do you know what I hate you for most?" she said softly. "Not the scheming, not your mother's humiliations. It's that you made me into someone who doesn't trust anyone. You made me feel like every 'I love you' came with a price tag." Sobbing came through the phone. She could hear him struggling to breathe, to form words. "But then I figured it out." Zoe opened her eyes, watching fireworks bloom endlessly overhead. "I couldn't let you destroy my faith in love. The world is big, there are still many people worth trusting, worth loving. You were just one wrong option. Thank you for saying that. I'm not comforting you." Zoe's voice returned to calm. "I'm just telling you the truth. Goodbye, Christian. Live your life. Don't contact me again." She hung up before he could respond. Her finger hovered over the screen for a moment, then she blocked the number. No more second chances. No more midnight texts to ignore. The door was closed. The fireworks were at their peak, cascading gold waterfalls falling from the sky. The crowd erupted in cheers, the New Year's countdown was starting. 10. 9. 8. Zoe put her phone back in her pocket and walked toward the stage. 7. 6. 5. 4. Vivian waved from the crowd. Her mother stood beside the stage, already wearing a new red cotton jacket. Susan was beaming, a rare, unguarded smile that made her look 20 years younger. 3. 2. 1. Happy New Year. The whole of Flushing was shouting it. Zoe stepped onto the stage. The spotlight hit her. Below were countless smiling faces, Chinese, Korean, Indian, Latino, black, white. Flushing was a microcosm of the whole world, everyone chasing their dreams in their own way. "Hello everyone, my name is Zoe Lynn." She spoke into the microphone, her voice carried far by the speakers. "I grew up here. My mother runs a small restaurant on the next street. My father was that restaurant's chef before he passed. When I was 11, I started Flushing's first children's free library on this very street." Applause rose from the crowd. "Later I left Flushing. I went to MIT, to Wall Street, to a big house in Connecticut. I thought the farther I went, the more successful I'd be. But I discovered that no matter where I go, I carry Flushing's scent with me. It's the smell of soy sauce and star anise, the sound of vendors calling out at the vegetable market at 4 in the morning, the rumble of the number 7 train crossing Queens. No matter how others define me, I know who I am. I'm Susan Lynn's daughter, a daughter of Flushing. And I'm proud of that." The applause grew louder. Someone in the crowd whistled, someone shouted, "How young da," in Chinese. A group of teenagers waved handmade signs reading, "Zoe Lynn forever." "So tonight, I want to announce something." Zoe unfolded her speech. "The Zhao Ning Charitable Trust will build a new community library in Flushing. It will have 1 million books, 50 study rooms, a theater, and a rooftop garden. It will be named after my father." She paused, looking toward her mother. Susan was already crying, tears streaming freely down her face, but she was smiling too, a radiant, broken open smile. The Lin Jiangwo Community Library. The crowd erupted in deafening cheers. Fireworks exploded, children shrieked, adults clapped, all merging into Flushing's most resounding New Year's symphony. The sound was enormous, overwhelming, and Zoe felt it in her chest like a second heartbeat. Zoe put down her speech and stood at center stage. Fireworks bloomed behind her like a golden ocean. She looked at the crowd below, and seemed to see the 10-year-old Zoe still standing on the corner, guarding her cart of old books, the crooked signs saying, "Flushing Children's Free Library." 25 years had passed. She'd finally fulfilled that little girl's wish. Spring came quickly. After Manhattan's ice and snow melted, Central Park's cherry blossoms burst open overnight. Susan Restaurant received 2 Michelin stars. The New York Times food critic devoted a full-page spread to this establishment that was redefining Chinese cuisine. Susan Lin appeared on the cover in her white chef's coat, the headline reading, "From Flushing to the World, a 62-year-old female chef's first bloom." Vanderbilt Asset Management's name change ceremony took place in March. When the new plaque reading, "Zhaoning Capital," was installed in the lobby of that midtown glass tower, Zoe didn't attend. She sent Vivian to represent her and went to the Flushing Community Center instead. She arrived just as Eleanor was finishing her community service for the day. The two women met under the cherry blossom tree in front of the community center. Eleanor wore a plastic apron, her hair messily tied back, carrying a bucket of cleaning supplies. When she saw Zoe, she froze, nearly dropping the bucket. "You," Eleanor said with difficulty. "Are you here to check on my work?" "No," Zoe said. "Just passing through." Cherry blossom petals fell between them. Eleanor looked utterly different from the woman she'd been 6 months ago, not in appearance, but in something deeper. The arrogant gleam in her eyes was gone, replaced by the exhaustion of someone whose sharp edges had been worn down by hard work and unexpected humility. "I've completed 400 hours, Eleanor said suddenly. "The community center director says I'm the most diligent volunteer she's ever had." Zoe raised an eyebrow. "That was unexpected. I get up at 6 every morning, arrive at 7. Wash dishes for 3 hours, then help in the kitchen preparing lunch. In the afternoon I teach English to children of new immigrants." Eleanor's voice was calm, no boasting, no complaining, just stating facts. "Last week, an elderly Chinese woman held my hand and cried for a long time because her daughter was being abused and was afraid to call the police. I helped her contact a lawyer. Your Ruotang Foundation lawyer took her case pro bono." Zoe listened quietly without speaking. Eleanor looked up at the cherry blossoms overhead. Petals fell into her graying hair, and she didn't seem to notice. "For the first time in my life, I realized how many people in Flushing need help," she said. "And for the first time, I realized that in your community, neighbors take care of each other. Not that superficial Vanderbilt socializing, real help, watching each other's kids, lending money, bringing meals when you're sick. You used to look down on that kind of relationship," Zoe said. Eleanor was silent for a long time. "I did," she admitted. "I thought high society was the most civilized place in the world. But that elderly Chinese woman, her surname is Chen, after her daughter's situation was resolved, she brought me a box of homemade dumplings to thank me. She hugged me and cried, called me a good person. I've received many gifts in my life, expensive bags, jewelry, yacht trips. But no one had ever hugged me because I'd been good." The wind blew, and cherry blossoms fell like rain. The pink petals swirled around them both, beautiful and ephemeral. "Zoe Lin," Eleanor said suddenly, "I know I have no right to say this, but I'll say it anyway, I'm sorry. For those 3 years. For every word I said, every look I gave you, every time I made you feel like you didn't belong. I was wrong. I was so wrong, and I'll never be able to undo it." Zoe looked at her, this woman who'd humiliated her in the most elegant ways, belittled her with the most refined vocabulary, schemed against her with the most deceptive smiles. Now she stood here with a plastic apron, a cleaning bucket, apologizing under a Flushing cherry blossom tree. "I accept your apology," Zoe said. Not because you deserve forgiveness, but because I no longer need to carry hatred for you to keep living. Eleanor's lips trembled. She lowered her head, tears falling onto her plastic apron. Thank you. Her voice was barely audible. Zoe turned to leave. After a few steps, she stopped. Eleanor. Yes. The community center needs a new front desk receptionist next week. Paid, not volunteer. If you're interested, you can interview. Eleanor froze. You're helping me find a job. I'm not helping you. Zoe turned back, the corner of her mouth lifting slightly. I'm helping Granny Chen. She needs someone who can speak English to answer the phones. She continued walking, leaving Eleanor standing alone under the cherry blossom tree, staring after her for a long time. The older woman's hand went to her chest, and she let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for months. That night, Zoe received a text from an unknown number. She deleted the contact, but she knew who it was. The message contained only one photo and one line. The photo showed a messy studio apartment, books piled everywhere. In the center of the wall hung one thing, the photo album from their relationship, open. Next to it, the ring engraved with, "You are my home," hung on a silver chain from the album's corner. The line was just 4 words, "I look at it every day." Zoe stared at the message for a long time. She could picture him there, in that small apartment, living with the weight of what he'd lost. Part of her felt a flicker of something, not quite pity, not quite closure, just a faint acknowledgement that he was human too, flawed and broken and paying for his choices. Then she put down her phone, didn't reply, and blocked that number too. Some things, once ended, stay ended. Outside the window, Manhattan's night sky was tinged lavender by countless lights. She sat alone in her new penthouse on Central Park West, the latest issue of Time Proof spread out before her. On the cover, she stood at the entrance of the newly completed Lin Jiangwo Community Library in Flushing, surrounded by dozens of children clutching books. The headline read, "How She Gave Away Tens of Billions of Dollars." She turned to the inside pages and found the editor's title, "The Real Face of Wall Street's Ghost, I Was Just an Ordinary Girl." An ordinary girl from Flushing. She closed the magazine, turned off the light, and got into bed. In the darkness, her phone lit up with a voice message from her mother, "Zhao Zhao, come home for dinner tomorrow. I made your favorite lychee pork." Zoe smiled. She'd go tomorrow. And the day after, and the day after that. She'd go home as often as she wanted, because home wasn't a mansion in Connecticut or a penthouse on Central Park West. Home was wherever her mother was stirring a pot of broth and calling her name. She closed her eyes. In her mind, she saw that street corner from when she was 10. The cart lined with old books, the crooked words on the cardboard. Little Zoe sat on a small stool with a well-worn copy of The Little Prince open on her lap. There was a sentence in that book she'd always remembered. "It is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye." She had seen hurt, greed, the lowest depths of human nature. Then she chose to come back, to rebuild, to turn it all into books in the hands of more children. She had learned that true strength wasn't in how much wealth you accumulated, but in how much you could give away and still feel whole. The lights of Flushing went out one by one in the night. But tomorrow the sun would rise again. Just like those tears stung by kitchen smoke, those wounds carved by cold glances, those nights torn open by betrayal, they could all become, in the end, a soft, steadfast heart that had learned, at last, not to fear.